Brazil's former president, Luiz Inacio Lula da Silva, has been freed from prison until he exhausts all his has been freed from prison after courts have ruled that people in prison can stay out until they've exhausted all appeals. In Bolivia, President Evo Morales quit and fled to Mexico. His replacement, Jeanine Anez, has declared herself interim president, but she doesn't enjoy full support. Meanwhile, voters in Sri Lanka must choose between two powerful political families when they head to the polls tomorrow. To unpack some of these stories that happened in the past week, I'm joined in studio by Adil Nchabeleng from Political Economy Southern Africa. Adil, thank you for joining us on Newsworld. As always, good to have you here. Maybe we should start in Brazil with the former president, ex-president, being released from prison due to the new Supreme Court ruling. What is this ruling all about?
Look, the ruling is all about the fact that they said that people have an opportunity to still appeal if they are in prison and held on the basis of an appeal. There is a slight chance that if the appeal doesn't go in successfully in the favor of Lula da Silva, he might actually return back to prison. This is actually something that was created. Remember that Lula da Silva was imprisoned, over the basis that there was an allegation that he corruptly received money to buy an apartment and a farmhouse, and as a result was actually held in prison for that. So the charges are quite political, as it has been said, and the tension between the Brazilian, former president, which is Lula da Silva, as well as the current government, is over the issue of the popularity and the power aspect of it. He was arrested during the time when he was actually running for elections, re-elections at the time.
I mean, speaking of the current president, Jair Bolsonaro, he is obviously, Lula is his main rival. Has there been a response from Bolsonaro as yet?
Bolsonaro has been actually very responsive. He actually considers Lula da Silva as a scoundrel, and he hopes that, with the system of justice now coming up to looking at the appeal, he actually is hoping that he might actually be now, reconvicted again and actually sent to prison under a sentence in this case. So I mean, it's been a sort of a tag and tug war, and they've been actually sort of responding to each other via Twitter as well as via social media.
It is fascinating to see that interaction on social media. I mean, when we look at Lula, I mean, when he was released from prison, he received quite a very warm welcome. I mean, an exciting reception from crowds. I mean, is that a sign of how popular he is? I mean, for a man who's facing corruption charges?
He is one of the most popular president that has ever actually led, Brazil, given the fact that during his tenure at the time, I mean, Lula da Silva, from any political point of view, was one of the anchoring figure in tower. You would call him a Mandela of Brazil, in a sense, because he won, he fought against the aspect. He brought in a lot of people from the left side who were poor, who were marginalized, who didn't have any respect in society. He actually uplifted the society and actually eradicated, 50% of Brazil. There was upward mobility in terms of wealth, and they started getting into the middle class section, and there was a lot of development within Brazil. He ruled within that short space of time. He brought in the workers and actually elevated their status within the country.
I'm also intrigued to understand his role in politics now. Obviously, I don't think he can return to politics, but he does have quite an influence. Would he contribute to maybe more divisions within Brazil, polarization perhaps?
In terms of the Brazil politics, one, there is the most very strong left-centered, workers-based politics. There is a much more far-right, sort of liberal, politics, whereby the middle class are feeling far much more on the liberal side of it, about the aspect of constitutional democracy and all of those things. But when you look at the influence that Brazil, in terms of Lula da Silva, has actually built within Brazil, it's such that he's been much more favored among the poor, the marginalized communities. I think it's actually at his age, still prime for him to be still running for president, which means there is a bereft of leadership. I mean, you can't have old people at that age still contesting presidential interest. But in terms of an influential figure, no doubt he's one of the most actually towering figure in the Northern American space politically, from a Brazilian point of view. So based on what that fact is, he still is now contesting elections. The possibility that he might rerun, he might actually go in and join the politics and rerun again, is far much more stronger. And he is a popular person, and people love popularity. So they're not electing on the basis of age, ability, they're only electing on the basis of popularity, and somebody who can draw the party itself together and reunify it, and then actually give it a bit of a strength and life.
And it's for the working class as well.
Particularly for the working class.
All right, while we're in the topic of Latin America, we also saw Bolivia this week, the president, or the former president now, Evo Morales, resigning, making accusations that his life is in danger, and then granted asylum in Mexico. And then, in a turn of events, Jeanine Anez, who was a Senate leader, took power or declared herself as the interim president of Bolivia. Does she have the power to do that? Was this legal? Was this all in due process?
Look, in terms of Jeanine Anez appointing herself as an interim president, there was no due process. First of all, the requirement for the resignation of Evo Morales was on the basis that they are going to do a rerun of the election.
Which is what
that is what the military and the police was actually pushing for. Now, between the whole thing, when he was actually forced to resign and actually even had to be exiled right now into into Mexico, it was on the basis that there should have been a rerun of the election. Remember that Evo Morales came back after power now, on the 4th term, by the way, after he was elected 2 months ago. And there was a dispute over election results. There was a marginal win by Evo Morales, who was a very strong figure as well in the past with regards to galvanizing the poor and the minority and the marginalized class within,
He tried to avoid a runoff with Carlos Mesa.
He
tried to avoid a runoff election with Carlos Mesa. That was where the whole, the election, the rigged election accusations came about as well.
Look, he said, look, there can be a rerun of the election. That is the condition why he actually resigned as a president. He said, look, in order to bring peace, to make sure that our people are not, targeted and they are not actually, been shot at as well as brutalized, it is best that he resigns and he calls for a rerun of the election. And in the interim, it was expected that the military will take over the administration and the senator, or what do you call it, the judge, the senior judge in the country would actually be appointed to be looking at the administration on administration level. But what then happened subsequently, whereby Jeanine Anez assumed power and installed herself as an interim president, was unprecedented on its own. It was not planned, but it seems that the opposition on the right side had already prepared itself to occupy the vacuum and the space. Because if you remember that the streets were actually much more, the agitation on the streets in terms of the protest and the people marching and causing all of the, the havoc was based on the liberal forces that are coming from the right. So that is why actually he then decided that if there is so much of riots and tension on the streets, it is in the best interest that they do a election rerun.
Regardless of how Anez has claimed power, gripped onto power, do you think that she has the ability to maintain some sort of control in Bolivia until interim elections?
At this stage, no, because there is just so much of continuing tension. There is nothing functioning in Bolivia. All the streets are actually empty. The shops are closed. Business is not functioning at the stage. So I don't know how they're going to do it.
She does have support of the police. She has support of the military. She has support of the Roman Catholic Church. She has support, backing from the U.S.
Remember, in the Latin American politics, the U.S. support means really literally nothing. If you're particularly supported by the U.S., you are seen as an anti-people's force. So even if she is parcel of the current regime that has ousted Evo Morales out of power, she will not be the favorite among the majority, downtrodden, poor, marginalized society and community within Bolivia. They are unhappy and they have completely boycotted her. And remember again, Evo Morales represents an indigenous Bolivian. People like Jeanine Anez are actually seen as non-indigenous Bolivian. They're seen as mixed race and all of that. And they're not favored in a way from a Bolivian point of view.
How's it being viewed across Latin America?
The current thing is actually being viewed very negatively. For the fact that Mexico has chosen to give Evo Morales asylum currently in Mexico is an indication that there is a massive tension. The fact that Mexico has chosen to support the current stance by Evo Morales to say what has happened to her was a coup in the country and his life is in danger, and as a result they extended an asylum to him, indicates clearly. Remember, they sent in a plane to get him out of, Bolivia in order to rescue him. And now he's currently in Mexico preparing a return of rerunning for politics and rerunning for elections back in Bolivia.
All right. And then let's also move on to Sri Lanka. They're heading to the polls tomorrow. Obviously, they're under high alert given the terrorist attacks, Easter terrorist attacks. Many candidates up for this election tomorrow, 35 candidates to be exact, but 2 frontrunners, but also very controversial men that come from 2 very strong political families.
The current scenario currently in Sri Lanka is very interesting. You have now the main rival political party, which is a faction that is currently a family mostly dominated party, which is about 7 members of them are currently contesting for political interest as well as power. The 2 main being the brother, who was the former military, defense secretary.
And he's been accused of human rights violations.
The other brother was the president at the time. So there was an accusation of both the brother, who was the military chief of military, who was actually responsible for coiling down the uprising from the Tamil Tigers. So as a result, there was a huge tension that happened, and he called them down, and he brought in a lot of nationalism as back into the Sri Lankan country as well as region. And he made sure that there is no more uprising and no more, literally sparking back of the Tamil Tiger, interest in any.
This is Rajapaksa. Rajapaksa. And then we have Premadasa, who's got quite a lot of support from the minorities, particularly the Tamils and Muslims.
Yes.
In the region as well. Between the 2, who is the favorite? Who could we see most likely be the next president of Sri Lanka?
Pradadaska is currently being seen as the most prime president. By tomorrow, the re-election running, it looks like the family is coming back into power. And if the family is coming back into power because they are running on the nationalist ticket and enticing the much more bigger majority within the Sri Lankan society to say that they should be voting for them because they will help them to coil down the current uprising within the Tamil Tigers, those are the ones that are now currently supporting the opposition, leaders. So it's going to be a huge rerun. But if it happens, it means that you're going to have a family empire, more or less of what has happened previously, in the Kennedys in the U.S., where you had the brother as well as the other brother being party, sort of leaders in respect to running politics. So you'll have a similar situation happening there. In this case, it's not just only 2 brothers. It's about 7 brothers who are actually contesting interest and who are running political affairs and who are going to be in either parliament as well as in ministries and controlling the whole thing. So now you have a former minister of defense running for presidency and his brother now coming in, who possibly could go back in and join the brother as a minister of defense or be heading the parliament as a speaker of parliament.
Well, there you have it. Adil Nchabeleng from Political Economy Southern Africa joining us in studio. Thank you. Newsworld's going to take a short break. When we come back, a consortium has been given a blank check to build railways across the continent.